There was a man who had 2 sons. He was a man of means. His house was large, his fields wide, his herds well tended. His hands were weathered by work, but his voice was kind. He was not cruel, nor was he careless. In his home there was enough bread, enough peace, enough love. The older son was steady. He rose early, worked long, and rarely questioned. His heart beat to distant rhythms, not plows and hurt. Where his brother found comfort in the familiar, he felt only restlessness. Each morning felt the same as the last. Fields, chores, meals, sleep. He was not ungrateful, but he was unsatisfied. He obeyed his father, spoke plainly, and took pride in the land. He saw the value in tradition, in order, in doing what was expected. But the younger son, he was different. His eyes were wide, always drifting beyond the hills. At night, he lay in bed listening to the wind brush the trees and wondered what else might be waiting beyond the village of Bean. The reach of his father's name. He had heard stories of merchants who traveled to cities where lamps burned all night, of music that spilled into the streets, of laughter without duty, of coin, pleasure, and freedom, fields, cattle, coins. The elder son received his portion in silence. The younger, with growing eagerness, gathered all that was given to him, and slowly the thought began to take root in him. This life is too small for me. One morning, he stood before his father in the courtyard. The sun had barely cleared the ridge, and dew still clung to the edges of the stone path. The elder son was already in the fields, but the younger stood tall, heart pounding. Each town he passed grew larger, each and louder, each face more foreign. He bartered with traders, ate strange and savory food, and slept on cushions far softer than the hay of his father's barn. "Father," he said, "give me the share of the inheritance that will belong to me. To ask for it early was to say, I want the blessing, not the bond. I want what you offer, not who you are." He filled his days with distraction, but his soul remained thirsty. He simply nodded quietly and turned. "I wish to take what is mine now and go my own way." It was a bold request, unusual, even offensive. An inheritance is a gift given at the end of a father's life. The father looked at his son. His eyes, filled with years of love and labor, did not burn with anger. He did not shout or shame. In the days that followed, he divided his estate. There was no ceremony, no farewell feast, just a mourning web. With a pack on his back and a satchel of silver, the younger son walked down the road, his shadow long behind him. The road was wide and full of promise. At first, the young man felt light, as if he had stepped out of a dream and into his own story. He spoke less at home. He dressed like the local. His silver brought him friends who laughed at his jokes and raised glasses to his freedom. No one asked where he was from. No one asked who he used to be. And for a time, that was enough. But deep inside, beneath the laughter, beneath the wine, his heart was not at rest. Every joy faded quickly. Every coin spent left a hollow place behind it. Still, he pressed on. More parties, more faces, more nights he didn't remember. The inheritance, once so full and shining, dwindled in his hand. Silver slipped through his fingers like sand. And so begins the story of a son chasing the world, and a father whose love follows even the silence. This is a tale of freedom mistaken for joy, and of a road that must wind through emptiness before it can lead home again. The city that welcomed him was loud with color, restless with life. Markets buzzed by day, inns blazed with laughter by night, and no one seemed to sleep unless they chose to. The young man from the quiet hills found himself in a place where time rushed forward like a river, and every street offered a new indulgence. Here, he was master of his own purse, his own bed, his own name. He filled tables with roasted meats, warm bread, and jars of dark wine. Musicians played for him. Strangers toasted him. He made new friends every night and forgot many of their names by morning. He paid in silver and was treated with respect, or at least with the warm smiles of those who liked the weight of his coin. No sunrise bells, no quiet father watching at the gate. What once felt exciting became expected. What once brought joy began to demand more. At first, he was dazzled. He had received much more than enough, he thought. But money, like time, disappears easily when it's not watched. He was no longer the younger son living in the shadow of an older brother. He bought fine garments, deep reds and blues, soft linen instead of rough wool. There were no chores. It felt for a while like freedom. But freedom without purpose quickly becomes waste. The young man found himself chasing the feeling of fullness, not realizing it was fading with each choice. And all the while, his silver thin. He did not count his coins. Not at He looked around the rented room, bare walls, a cracked bowl, the echo of old music, and understood what he had ignored. He offered to sweep, to clean, to carry. Doors closed. Faces turned. The merchants no longer greeted him with cheer, only with outstretched hands. The inns grew colder. The laughter faded. But here he was, kneeling in filth, trying to gather enough scraps to feed beasts. The pigs snorted and fought over pods that looked like twisted shells things. Not meant for people. His friends, once eager to drink beside him, vanished one by one when the wine ran dry. And then, one morning, he opened his pouch and found it nearly empty. He was alone and nearly broke. To make matters worse, the land itself turned against him. Bread doubled in price. Water was scarce. Beggars multiplied. Merchants locked their stalls. The city grew thin, hard, and silent. Then quick, a famine came. It crept in slowly at first, empty baskets at the market, dry soil in the fields. And for the young man with no friends, no family, and no coin, there was no welcome left. He wandered the streets, searching for work, but no one needed hands that came with no skill. The way his father's voice would fill the yard at dusk. At last, a man sent him to the countryside to care for his pigs. The dignity they still wore. The work was low, humiliating. In his father's house, even the servants had dignity. And more than once, the young man looked at the food they ate and felt hunger rise. He could not believe it. His hands trembled with cold, with shame, with something else, something faint and rising. The son of a generous man, a boy once cloaked in fine robes, now bent in the mud, mouth dry, stomach aching, heart hollow. He had run so far and found so little. Then, one evening as the sun sank low and the wind carried the scent of dust and sorrow, something stirred in him. Not pride, not anger, the warmth. The servants who had bread to spare, but memory. He thought of his father's house, not the roof or the walls, but the table, and he whispered aloud, "How many of my father's hired servants have food enough and to spare? And here I am, dying of hunger." He sat in silence, the pigs shifting around him. "I hope I will go," he said. "I will rise and return to my father. I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me one of your hired servants.'" It was not pride that moved him now. It was repentance. And with that, he but turned toward home. The sun had barely risen when he left the pig fields behind. His feet were sore, blistered from days spent wandering with no sandals left to carry him. His clothes, once soft linen dyed in city dyes, were now faded rags clinging to a body thinned by hunger and worn by regret. And even that he repeated under his breath like a prayer, unsure if his voice would carry past the gate he had once walked through with joy. But each step, though painful, moved him closer to the place he had once called home. He walked without companions. He carried no gifts, no silver, no rehearsed pride. All he held was a confession. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." Not to be eloquent, but to steady himself against the fear that rose with every mile. Make me as one of your hired servants. Again and again he spoke it. What if the gate was shut? What if his father refused him? What if the shame was too great to be The road was long. He walked like one returning from war only. The battle had been within, and the wounds, though unseen, bled still. It took him back to the quiet places, the dusty crossroads where he had once chosen departure, the vineyards he had ignored, the streams he had passed without thought. They were familiar, yet strange. Smaller now, he did not walk proudly, but the wind smelled of olives and bread. And somewhere far ahead, past the hills, was a man who had never stopped watching. Each day, the father rose early, not out of duty but hope. He looked out over the road beyond the fields, past the stone wall that lined their land, to the path his son had once taken away. Others stopped watching. His older son no longer mentioned the younger's name. The servants avoided the topic. But the father's eyes were steady. He did not chase his son, but he waited with love that never slept. He was older, robed, expected to walk with calm. But none of that mattered. His feet pounded the earth like a song. His heart had longed to sing. His arms reached out before his words ever came. And then, one morning, far off in the haze of the road, he saw something. A figure small at first, then slowly rising into shape, thin, bent, slow of step. But the war, the tilt of the shoulders, the rhythm of the movement was known to him. He did not pause. He did not wait for pride. The father ran. It was not the kind of run that dignified men performed. He ran down the path, past the startled servants in the vineyard, over the stones of the road. And when he reached the boy still far off, still rehearsing his apology, the father threw himself around him. His robe, rich and full, wrapped the tattered rags of a starving son. He kissed his head, held his face. Tears fell like rain after a long drought. Father, the son began, voice trembling. I have sinned against heaven and before you. He walked beneath his father's arm, washed in mercy, welcomed not by worth, but by love. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father did not let him finish. He called over his shoulder, his voice ringing through the valley. Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and prepare a feast. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And so they led the son home, no longer a stranger, no longer a servant. And in the house that had once sat quiet with sorrow, music began to rise. The fire was lit, the table was set, and the lost son, broken and barefoot, was given a seat at the feast. The music rose before the sun had fully set. It began with the sound of a flute, then the rhythm of dancing feet. Laughter spilled into the courtyard, where lamps had been lit and the long tables stretched beneath the stars. The aroma of roasted meat filled the air rich and warm, the kind reserved only for the most sacred celebrations. Inside the house, joy thundered. Servants moved quickly, smiling. The cooks prepared bread and honey cakes. Wine was poured. Plates were set. Guests gathered, some from the nearby village, some from the fields, answering the call that something remarkable had happened. A son who had been lost was home. But outside, in the distant fields, the older brother knew nothing of music. He was working while others celebrated. He was bent over the grain, faithful to the rhythms of the land. He had not left. He had not wandered. He had done everything his father had asked and more. His hands were thick with calluses, his tunic stained with dust and sweat. As the day ended, he made his way toward the house, expecting rest, perhaps a quiet meal, a kind word, nothing more. But then he heard it. He looked toward the house and saw movement, dancing, clapping, guests arriving, the music, the voices, the laughter, the celebration. He paused at the edge of the field, confused. What was happening? He called over one of the servants and asked. And the servant, unable to contain the joy, replied, Your brother has come home, and your father has killed a fattened calf. His hands, which had been steady in the field, now trembled, because he has received him back safe and sound. The older brother did not rejoice. He did not move. Instead, something old and buried swelled within him something bitter. His voice, when it came, was low and full of pain. He clenched his jaw. He did not enter the house. He found his elder son standing alone, shoulders rigid, eyes fixed on the dirt. He turned his back to it and stood outside in the dark. Word reached the father quickly. He excused himself from the guests, set down his cup, and stepped outside into the cool night air. "Come," the father said softly. "Come inside. Celebrate with us." But the older son did not move. "All these years I have served you. I never disobeyed. And yet you never gave me even a young goat to celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours returns, the one who wasted everything with harlots and strangers, you killed a fattened calf for him." His words were sharp, but behind them was a wound he had stayed. And now it seemed he had been forgotten. The father did not rebuke him. He did not raise his voice. He stepped closer and laid a hand on his son's shoulder, strong, steady, kind. "My son," he said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But it was right that we celebrate and be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And so they stood there, two men beneath the stars, one who had wandered and returned in rags, one who had stayed but struggled to rejoice, and a father who loved them both, not for what they had done, but simply because they were his. The house pulsed with light and music. The fire in the great hearth danced like a spirit rejoicing, casting golden shadows across the walls. The returning son sat near the head of the long table, now bathed, robed, and freshly clothed, not in garments of his former life, but in the finest of his father's, a sign not just of welcome, but of restoration. His hair was still unkempt, his face worn by months of wandering, but his eyes were different now, softer, quieter. His heart had let go of pride, and in its place, gratitude had bloomed. Many remembered the younger son as a boy running through the fields, full of mischief. They had watched him leave. Some had whispered of shame. Others had simply grieved. He had not expected this. He had rehearsed the servant's plea, but his father had received him not as a worker, but as a son. The servants watched their master with quiet awe, having never seen him so free, so full. He laughed with old friends, poured wine into their cups, and told stories with tears in his eyes. The table groaned under the weight of abundance. Bowls of grain, roasted lamb, figs, honeycomb, and fresh bread. There were spices that had long remained stored for only the most joyous occasions. The aroma of cinnamon and wine swirled through the air. The guests, both neighbors and servants, marveled not just at the feast, but at the story they had heard. And now he was here alive, and the father, seated near him, beamed with a joy deeper than laughter. Across the yard, lanterns were hung high. Children danced to the rhythm of tambourines. But the younger son was still, not because he was sad, but because he was over. How had the cold silence of the pig fields turned into the warmth of this table? How had his emptiness led to such fullness? His father leaned toward him quietly, speaking so only he could hear. "This is not repayment," he said. "This is love. You are always my son, even when you forgot, even when you ran." The young man's eyes filled again. No one had earned this feast. It was not a reward to offer the same grace to the one who stayed as to the one who strayed. It was grace, and grace cannot be measured. Meanwhile, the older son stood at the edge of the house, watching the light flicker through the windows. He had not entered yet. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable. And yet, his father's words, "Everything I have is yours," echoed in his heart. He had thought his loyalty was being overlooked. He had thought the party was a celebration of disobedience. But now he saw the truth. This was not about comparing sons. This was about a heart made whole again. The father stepped once more outside to where the older son stood. Wait not to plead this time, but simply to invite, to remind. Come, he said gently. There is room at this table for both of you, and that is the quiet miracle of grace. It makes space where there was none. It turns hunger into celebration, absence into reunion, distance into belonging. The younger son looked at his plate filled, overflowing, and knew what had been restored was not land or gold, but identity. He had not just come home. He had been welcomed, and now he's sad, not only fed, but forgiven. The celebration carried on into the evening, its joy spilling out across the courtyard like wine from an overflowing cup. Laughter rose. Music played. Lamps flickered in the breeze. From every corner of the house came the sounds of life, vibrant, warm, renewed. But behind one door, away from the music, the older son sat in silence. He had not yet joined the feast. He stared at the cup in his hand still full, untouched, and thought about all that had passed. He had not run off. He had not demanded his portion. He had stayed when the younger had fled. He had shouldered the work, walked the rows, and kept the home steady. Yet the robe, the ring, the calf, the dance, they were not for him. And bitterness, like a low fog, threatened to settle in the cracks of his soul. Then he heard footsteps, slow, familiar. The door opened, and the father stepped in, not as a master commanding, but as a father coming to listen. He sat beside his firstborn and said nothing at first. Not all reckonings come with shouts. Some come quietly, like a father waiting for his son to speak. The older son finally broke the silence. I have been here all these years. I never disobeyed you. I worked in these fields. I honored your name. And yet no feast, no robe, no celebration. But his voice caught sharp with pain. He wastes it. Our land returns to joy. The father didn't rebuke him. He understood. The ache of feeling overlooked is real. The labor of years without outward reward can wear on even the strongest heart. He turned to his son and spoke not with correction, but with compassion. My beloved son, he said, you have always been with me. All that is mine has always been yours. But your brother, he was lost then. Now he is found. This feast isn't about what he's done. It's about who he is. He is your brother, my son. And tonight is not about fairness. He had simply grown so used to it, he had forgotten its worth. It is about love. The words settled slowly in the elder son's chest. Even after all he'd done, even after all the grace poured over him, a part of him longed to be fully restored not only to the father, but to the family. He had wanted a reward for service, but his father had given something higher than reward, relationship. He had not missed out on love. He had always had it. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to remember. Outside, the younger son looked toward the door. The younger son stood too, unsure whether to smile or brace himself. He had begun to laugh again, but his eyes often drifted to the space where his brother should have been. Then the door opened, and his brother stepped in. The music softened. Heads turned. The oldest son stood there, silent for a moment. Then, slowly, he crossed the room, but the elder brother stopped in front of him. He did not speak a grand speech. He did not embrace right away, but he placed his hand, firm and steady, on his brother's shoulder. That was enough. The table had room for both, and grace, once poured, did not run dry. The fire in the courtyard crackled as the night deepened. Most of the guests had eaten their fill. Some were laughing softly over wine. Others were gathered near the musicians. Something deeper than celebration was taking place, clapping slowly to the fading rhythm. The air was gentle, now less wild. Celebration, more quiet, contentment. But inside the house, more even than his brother had needed when he turned home from the distant land. Pride, after all, runs deeper when it hides behind obedience. A reunion, a healing, a restoration. The older brother remained standing beside the younger, hand still resting on his shoulder. It had taken courage to come through that door. The younger brother met his gaze, not with defensiveness, not with shame, but with something new. humility. There was no competition now. His face unreadable. No rivalry. Only gratitude. After a silence, hands clasped, watching his sons at last, standing side by side. He added, they sat at the long table, father and sons together. I didn't expect this, the younger son said quietly, eyes moist with joy that words could never hold. Saying nothing, only smiling as they received it. It was an unspoken ritual, a sign, not a feast, but a fellowship. Both had found what they'd been missing. Any of it, the older brother nodded once. Neither did I, and then, but I think it's what we both needed. Their father stood nearby, quieter, holier. He didn't interrupt. The house whispered with the sounds of closing plates, drowsy children, and servants cleaning quietly. But in the center of it all sat a family. He simply smiled. It had been a long journey for them both, one of distance and one of resentment. But in this house, beneath this roof, the music rose again, still adjusting to fullness. Not just home, not just peace, but each other. Later, the younger ate slowly. The older poured wine for them both, no longer apart, but united in purpose. Their father broke the bread and handed pieces to each outside. But the moment at the table was different now. It was not just about celebration. It was about restoration. Around them, a father who had given freely, a son who had returned humbly, a brother who had forgiven deeply, and together they formed a circle that no shame, no pride, no mistake could break again. The older son looked at his brother and asked, gently, will you stay this time? The younger one nodded slowly, eyes glimmering. If you'll have me, and the father answered before either could speak again. You were never cast out, and you were never forgotten. Both of you have always had a place at my table. In that moment, it was clear. The story was never about the sin of one or the obedience of another. It was about the unchanging heart of a father who waits, who welcomes, and who restores. Morning came softly to the house, quieting the echoes of last night's celebration. The lamps had gone dark, the fire turned to ash, and the guests, full and joyful, had returned to their homes. But in the stillness of dawn, the house did not feel empty, it felt full. Not with music, not with food. The olive trees swayed gently. The birds had begun to sing. And for the first time in many long months, his heart was settled, but with peace. The father stood alone in the garden, watching the sun lift above the edge of his fields. Both his sons were home. The robe the father had given him still hung from his shoulders, no longer a strange costume, but a symbol of something he was learning to accept, that love could cover shame, and mercy could make a man whole again. And both had been found not just in body, but in spirit. Inside the house, the brothers rose early. The youngest son stepped outside first, barefoot on the cool stone. He looked out over the fields he once couldn't wait to leave. He handed half to his brother without a word. They ate in silence, watching the workers begin their day. They were more beautiful now, not because they had changed, but because he had. The older brother joined him shortly after, a small loaf of bread in his hands. He did not need to remind them of their story. They carried it in their hearts now, like a scar that had healed, like a well that had been filled after drought. Something unspoken passed between them, not just forgiveness, but a beginning, a brotherhood renewed. The father came to them quietly. He stood with one arm around each of them, not saying much, just breathing in the still air, present with his sons. This is what I prayed for, he said at last. Not just that you would return, but that we would be whole again. And then, with a gentle smile, the resentment that once colored every memory of his brother faded like morning mist. He did not erase the past, but he no longer let it define their future. Go now, work the fields, share the harvest, live not as strangers under one roof. He no longer stood at the gate each morning, watching the road with hope and pain. He listened more than he spoke. He labored with joy, not out of debt, but in gratitude. He learned the rhythms of the soil, the shape of the vineyard, the value of the quiet life he once fled. But his brothers under one name, and they did. The younger son returned not to the place of a servant, But as a true son, the older son found his heart softening. Together, they built something stronger than inheritance. They built trust. Years passed. The father grew older, his steps slower, but his joy deepened with each season. He no longer needed to. Both sons were near. The house echoed now, not with longing, but with laughter. And at every table, there was room. In time, when travelers passed by the old house and asked about the man who lived there, the villagers would smile and say, "Ah, yes, the man with the two sons. One who stayed, one who returned, and a father who loved them both without measure." And children would ask, "But which son was the prodigal?" And the answer was always the same: "We all are." And still, the Father runs to meet us.